Welcome to episode 4 of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. As always, we are here to keep you up to date with the latest news, tech, content and wisdom from the world of marketing. As always, my co-host is a man on a mission to demystify digital marketing. He's the host of the Content Marketing Studio podcast and other video series. Please welcome Mr. Pascal Fintoni.
Well, thank you very much for this wonderful welcome. What a pleasure it is to spend even more time with a man on a mission too. You're here to demystify marketing. You're the voice of the Marketing and Finance podcast and the host of the Roger Vlog video series. I give you Mr. Roger Edwards.
Oh, thanks, Pascal. So, without further ado, I think we should dive straight into the news. What do you think?
Let's do this.
So here we go with the news. Google Maps is launching Live View, a feature that helps you find directions using your phone camera and AR information, including buildings, street names and other landmarks.
According to Drum.com, lockdown has boosted the at-home habits of listeners and users of Spotify, with smart speakers, connected TV and game consoles up by 40%.
Brief is the name of the news aggregator app founded by former Google engineers. It promises to summarize the key facts, provides context, and offers viewpoints from both sides.
Following an announcement made earlier in the year, Instagram is now allowing you to pin up to 3 comments on top of your post, helping you give a shout out to your best contributors and highlight positive contributors.
A recent survey by WordPress Engine would suggest that Generation Z wants brands to be truthful and good, with 72% stating they're more likely to buy from a company that contributes to social causes.
Now, Roger, the UK government has banned Huawei from its 5G telecom network, and national operators must complete the removal of all Chinese technology by 2027.
And I'm glad you pronounced Huawei there, because I'm going to bring Huawei up later on in this podcast. So thanks for reminding me how to pronounce it. Microsoft is adding brand new features to Teams, including using AI to digitally create a shared background and make video call participants feel as though they are sitting in the same room.
And Facebook still has sights on becoming an internet service provider. The latest experiment, a robot that can install fiber optic cables on top of power lines already in place.
Wow, some really interesting tidbits there, and
Yeah.
a lot of it geared towards communication in this post-COVID-19 world, I guess.
The first one that you mentioned of Live View with Google, they announced it 2 years ago at their conference. And I've been actually kind of looking forward to it, where you can grab your phone, point your phone in the direction of travel, and it brings additional information from Google Maps and the likes. And when they announced it was such a big thing. And 2 years on, they're still just about to release it. So I don't know, did they announce it too early, Roger, or just because it's so complex that they had to wait a bit longer?
I'm not sure, Pascal. Was it originally designed to go with the Google glasses? So effectively they were going to try and superimpose almost like a heads-up display. As you walk down the street, you'd get that AR information. Maybe it was just the fact that the Google glasses didn't work as well as they thought they would. And secondly, as you say, it's just such a mass of information, and it's just taken them longer than they thought to get it out there and live.
So, but the demonstration was great. I mean, people were so impressed. I mean, literally, if you go somewhere that you don't know, a city in particular, it's like, you bring Google Maps, you look down and you're just not sure which way to go. You would be able to point your phone down a street, and it would tell you whether or not you're going in the right direction, and add supplementary information with little vignettes and labels from Google Maps. So no, I think it's a great thing. And my other reaction in terms of the news that you've shared, Roger, is around this WP WordPress Engine survey about Generation Z and their willingness to trade with brands who are in business for good. I sometimes wonder, Roger, whether we don't, and I mean this kindly, we don't give Generation Z a bit too much credit and too many qualities, because I would argue that all generation would want to deal with a business who is behaving in a way that is honest and ethical.
Yeah, I think you're right. there's a lot talked about brands having causes now, isn't there? And sometimes I just think sometimes some brands seem to just jump onto the latest bandwagon, and it's almost like a soundbite or a way of getting some instant PR. But the reality is, all brands should be thinking of how they can be ethical, how they can look after their customers, how they can look after the environment, and yes, how they can support various causes, but do it because it's what you want to be. It's part of your mission, if you like. It's part of your vision, as opposed to just seeing it as another opportunity to grab some headlines. Because I think, as we've seen in the COVID crisis, people who've jumped onto the bandwagon without thinking it through, I think they've damaged their brands to a certain extent.
They have, and that's going to continue to do so.
So lots of interesting stuff on the news. I think it's probably time to move on to this week's content spotlights. This is rapidly becoming one of my favourite parts of the show. In addition to talking about films, which we're going to do a little bit later on. But this is where you and I pick a piece of content, and that could be an article from an online magazine or even a print magazine. It could be a podcast, could be a video, and we just discuss it and dig out the marketing issues and the marketing topics. So, Pascal, what have you got for us this week?
Well, I've got a video actually, Roger, this week. I know that in previous episode I kind of confessed my love of long-form content, written content, but this time it's a video. Let me give you a bit of context. So about a week or two ago, I was talking to a business acquaintance of mine who is having to bring their conference online, as many organizers have had to do. So I offered to have a coffee and a chat and just kind of say, well, this is what I think I understand now about creating an online experience, taking, the physical event to online. And in funny kind of way, Roger, it was almost similar to the recent podcast you published, where I gave Andrew, is his name, an account of, well, this is from the simple webinar all the way to the virtual conference and virtual summit. And it was literally like a major brain dump. And as he listened, he said, you know what you're telling me reminds me of a video that I saw recently. So he sent me a link to this video. Now, there's a chap called Marcus John Henry Brown. How's that for a wonderful SEO name? If you Googled, you can't be confused with somebody else. Marcus John Henry Brown is a stage performer who hacks business conferences. These are his own words, Roger. And he started a small series, call it a vlog, if you will, called Tiny Talks. And in this very first one, the title is quite simply Make Better Virtual Keynotes or Virtual Presentation. And it's a 4 or 5 minute video, really well crafted, as you would expect from someone like him, who is very extravagant and with much gusto and passion. But some of the statements and sayings really connected with me, connected, I think, with the podcast that you and I are doing here together. And what he's arguing, and he's kind of warning presenters, he's warning kind of keynoters that you've now become a pixel being. That people are going to be consuming your content and get to know you and connect with you via essentially small screens, small mobile phones and the likes. And that in a way your performance, because you are using video, needs to become film-like. I know that it's kind of preaching to the convert, but I thought let me kind of delve into that. And what he's saying is that despite the fact that it may be easier to convey a message because you don't have to travel, you don't have to go on stage, there isn't, if you like, all the AV complexity of a live event, he said, be careful, don't mistaken that for something that doesn't require as much, if not more, preparation. So he talks about a 3-stage approach to become film-like of write, then craft the content, and then really improve your performance. He's arguing that to become film-like, to be that pixel being, you have to give 20% more of your energy and kind of projection, if you like, of your ideas via the small screen. Is also arguing that a new skill that one has to develop is to learn to work with a camera. Because, of course, when you're on stage, or if you're in a small room, if you're presenting at a small business event, doesn't have to be necessarily large scale, then you have to learn to work with a camera, and this is a new skill. And you have to practice, practice, and practice. But essentially, the context has changed in his argument. And if you want to make a better virtual keynote, accept that you are a pixel being and try and provide a performance that is film-like.
This is just great stuff, isn't it? And you're absolutely right. And this is a coincidence. Last week's Marketing and Finance podcast that I put out was a solo show, and I was actually relaying some of the experiences I've had during lockdown, taking part in as a delegate to online conferences, being a speaker at online conferences, and even being a producer for an online conference. And a lot of what Marcus is saying is absolutely spot on. And I love his videos. They're short, sharp, to the point, but he intersperses it with graphics. There's a little bit of jump cutting going on there. So it feels like a TV production, and I really like that. And this video, this conference that I was involved with producing recently was called Protect X. It was a financial services conference. Part of it was pre-recorded and part of it was broadcast. Well, actually, the whole thing was broadcast live, but part of it was pre-recorded, broadcast live, if that makes sense. And what we wanted to try to do was to create the illusion with the audience that it was all done live, even though some of it was pre-recorded. And the feedback that we got from this online event was phenomenal. I'm still getting people tweeting me now and using the hashtag nearly 2 weeks on. And some of the people in the feedback said, this was so well rehearsed, it came across so well. And I'm thinking, you didn't spot it, did you? You didn't spot it, that some of it was pre-recorded. And that comes right back to what Marcus is saying. You can't go on video and wing it. I guess there's that temptation, I'm not stood on a stage, I've not got a great big audience in front of me that I can see, so I'll have my notes pinned up on the side of the computer and I can refer to them. Well, you wouldn't do that in a keynote presentation. You might not have memorized the script word for word, but you'd know what you were going to say, and you would have rehearsed it and blocked it out. Well, you have to do that on video as well. So great.
No, thanks. I thought you might like it, Roger. So, what have you got for me this week?
Well, I'm diving back into Marketing Week magazine. And Marketing Week magazine has a couple of high-profile columnists. We've already talked about Mark Ritson on one of the earlier episodes of Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast. This week, I want to tell you about an article written by Helen Edwards. Now, she's absolutely no relation to me whatsoever. And actually, the headline of this article is a little misleading. The headline says, "Don't expect a slogan to make your brand famous." But I actually think that the sub-editors of this magazine have actually just played a little bit too much with the headline, because when you dive into the article, what she's actually saying is a slogan can make you famous. But the difficulty is that there's so much stuff going on these days, and everybody is trying to craft slogans, they're trying to craft straplines, they're trying to craft hashtags, they're trying to come up with titles that work with SEO, they're trying to come up with YouTube titles that resonate with people. So, whereas 20 or 30 years ago, the straplines and the advertising slogans that a lot of us grew up with, like "For Mash Get Smash" and "Only the crumbliest, flakiest chocolate," that sort of thing that almost ingrained themselves on the minds of a generation. Today, it's so much harder to put together a slogan that's going to stand out, because everybody's trying to do it, Pascal. Even the government are getting into this now, aren't they? Like, get Brexit done, stay home, protect the NHS, save lives, that sort of thing. Everywhere is a slogan. And what Helen's saying is, it's so much harder to stand out now. But if you can work with your creative people, if you can work with your agency and your marketing team and the salespeople as well, if possible, it's absolutely worth putting the time in to come up with that slogan. Because if you nail it, if you come up with the next "For Mash Get Smash," or whatever it might be, that is your ability to break through all that noise that's out there. And if you can crack a slogan and weave it into your brand essence, you could stand out for years and years. It's a long game to get to the slogan, but once you've got there, it's got staying power.
I'm really pleased you bring that article up, because it reminds us as well of the key essentials of your kind of marketing toolkit or marketing and comms toolkit. And I think all too often people will always go back to, or the default position in today's economy is to find a digital tool, or to find, again, a hack or a trick, as I've mentioned in previous episode. And I think there are some fundamentals and some essentials that we need to revisit, we need to go back to, because they've been around much longer. I think they've proven themselves a lot more than the recent clever things you can do on Instagram. But also it's the impact on the employees that I always kind of look at now. If an organization kind of nails it, as you mentioned a moment ago, the positive impact and the ripple effect across the organization is also one that you can look forward to beyond, if you like, the engagement with your current and future prospects. I also wonder whether the slogan could be something audible or visual, Roger. I'm thinking, for example, a recent research exercise was a simple one, but someone put on video, on YouTube, videos of the opening gambit, the 2-3 seconds of, for example, streaming services, and say, if you don't watch the image, but you've listened to the sound, you'll know that's a Netflix kickoff kind of slogan, or an Amazon Prime, and I'm wondering also whether nowadays, as well as the crafting of the words, there's layers around sound and vision.
I think that would work. I mean, it's all part of the brand toolkit, isn't it? But I think one of the things that Helen is saying is that if you were to immediately think, what is the most recognisable marketing slogan, it's likely that you're going to immediately think of one that was quite a few years back. I'm thinking something like Domestos kills all known germs dead. Now, they still use that slogan today, but it's about 30 years old, maybe even longer. So maybe that's something that the listeners could do, people watching the show, listening to the show. What is the marketing slogan that springs to mind immediately, just without really thinking about it? Is it a modern one, like Nike, just do it? Or is it an older one, like Domestos? I think you might be quite surprised how old the slogans are, but that just reinforces the fact that if you put the work in to come up with something new, imagine coming up with something new that then had 20 to 30 years worth of staying power. It's worth the effort, I think.
It is.
Fantastic. So, again, finding some really, really interesting articles here, Pascal, and some really interesting content. This, as I say, this is turning out to be one of my favourite parts of the show. But now I think we should move on to marketing tech and apps. In this section of the show, we each pick 2 or 3 apps or pieces of tech from the marketing world that we'd like to discuss and highlight, which we found useful or we just think fantastic or exciting or just new enough to highlight on the show. So, Pascal, you're in the hot seat first. What are your 2 pieces of tech or apps this week?
So I've chosen 2 apps that can help you take things out. And I'm going to explain in a moment. So the first one I want to kind of give a little kind of plug to is called unscreen.com. Screen as in movie screen, and then unscreen.com is having humble beginnings, but they've got big plans. I want you to imagine a situation where you have recorded maybe a video, maybe a short video, and the background behind you is just not very nice, a bit of a clutter, or maybe the image or the colors are kind of clashing. This app allows you to remove the background using AI to essentially detect where you are and where you stand. You imagine that you're going to be cut out and almost recreate the effect of a green screen. So it will remove the background for you, Roger, but then you can add a color, solid color. You can leave it white, of course, or you can add some branded and so on and so forth. So at the moment, because it's in beta, they are allowing you to do like a GIF or a GIF, choose your spelling, And that can become a lovely little meme that you can put on social media to give maybe a longer form content, a bit of a shout out and so on. But I did a test. I have to tell you, it worked incredibly well. So that's just the beta version. The pro version, they promise to be able to do a full kind of vlogs recording or something like that, where they will literally remove the background. And I can think of many instances where many of us right now working from home, or we're not working in ideal kind of environment, and sometimes the background, it is what it is. You can't quite do something with it, so to remove it could be very helpful. So unscreen.com I think is worth paying attention to as they continue to grow and develop the app. The second one is about removing again, but this one is about removing sound. So there's an app called Krisp, spelled KRISP. As you know, if you do an app, you have to misspell the name. So krisp.ia allows you to remove background noise. Now, I've done some tests, and again, very impressed. And not just the noise, forgive me, of a normal room, but conversation, dog barking, people talking, and so on and so forth. It will learn from you. It will learn, what to remove, and again allow you maybe to produce some better audio content moving forward. And I can see where this is going, which is again by this idea of people having to work very, very differently, not always having full control of the environment, whether it's visually or orally, and to have those little additional kind of apps into your toolkit could make a big difference. So unscreen.com and krisp.ai.
Very interesting, especially like the unscreen idea. And it's amazing how this technology is just getting better by the day, isn't it, Pascal? Because, even a few months ago, the Zoom background, unless you had a green screen, it was actually quite dodgy, wasn't it? It made it look like you were in an episode of 1970s Doctor Who with some dodgy colour separation overlay, or chroma key as they call it. But just these little tweaks, and it's almost flawless. It's incredible to see the advancements in just a few months
right.
as we've had to adapt to this new world. So I wanted to draw your attention this week to Restream.io. Now, the reason I'm highlighting Restream is almost to compare it to an extremely heavy duty and very quite expensive equivalent. Now, I mentioned earlier in the show that I was involved in producing something called ProtectX. It was an online conference which was broadcast live, and I was privileged to work with a production company, and they had the industrial pro version of Wirecast. Now, Wirecast is it's a TV production grade broadcasting piece of software, extremely intuitive, lots of options to allow you to mix the vision, mix the graphics, mix scenes, overlay. It can do the green screen and all of that sort of thing. But you're talking about close to £1,000 for the full version, plus an ongoing annual, fairly hefty fee. Now, most of us who want to do live streaming aren't going to be able to afford to buy and maintain something like Wirecast. But Restream, which is effectively a browser-based broadcasting platform, I'm actually quite surprised by how quickly they're integrating quite a lot of the features that you would find on something as industrial strength as Wirecast. And I was lucky enough a while back to, and I think it was our friend Richard Tubb that pointed us in the direction of this, was to get an early sort of lifetime license to use Restream. And they just keep adding features, and they just keep, a few months ago they added the ability to bring guests in. Only this week they've added the ability to queue up video snippets or audio snippets that you could use as stings between scenes, and you could just queue them up in the timeline, and it's just developing by the day. So anybody who is interested in live streaming, maybe even you just want to test the water, rather than invest into a massively expensive, although incredibly good piece of software like Wirecast, try Restream.io as an alternative. The second piece of tech that I wanted to highlight is something that I've actually been using for 3 years now, and it's called Day One, Pascal. I guess you would probably describe it as a journaling app. So if, as the name would suggest, you go in every day and you add photos, you add your daily diary, I guess, or your affirmation, whatever it might be. What I've been using Day One for, in addition to saving my photographs and saving my diary events and all of those sort of things, is to record ideas for stories. Because as we all know, stories are so good in a marketing environment, whether you're telling a brand story, whether you're telling an individual personal brand story, or you're just telling a story to family or friends. It's always good to note down ideas for stories as they occur to you, because of things that are happening in your day-to-day life. And I just find this app, it's on the phone at the end of the day, 8:45, 9 o'clock at night, flip it open, Day One, type, photo, story idea, close it, takes 5-10 minutes tops. And I've been doing it for 3 years now. So and every day it reminds you of the last year's worth of content. So now every day I get to see what I was doing and the photos and the story ideas from the last 3 years. So I'm absolutely loving Day One. And sorry, Pascal, I want to do a very, very quick shout out. This is the third piece of tech, and it's a big piece of tech, and it's not a marketing piece of tech, but I'm quite upset about it, so I'm going to talk about it anyway. I just saw in the news over the last few days that British Airways, regrettably, as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, is with immediate effect going to retire its entire fleet of Boeing 747 jumbo jets. I'm quite upset about that. Maybe not as upset as when Concorde disappeared, but what an amazing aircraft the 747 is. I've flown on it many, many times. Luckily, I've tried first class, business class, premium economy and economy, experienced all the facets of the 747, and it's a remarkable aircraft, a remarkable piece of technology, and I'll be very sad to see it leave the skies.
It does feel like the end of an era. Interestingly, the day we were recording this video podcast and audio podcast, it was covered by the news, and it was a whole segment on the BBC Radio 2 program, and people were ringing from all generations, including the very first pilot who actually flew the aircraft, the very first aircraft, and his account of how special it felt at the time. And I think it's also it's linked, isn't it, to the kind of the British psyche about conquering the skies, and I think there's a lot going on that. So let's see what the new generation of aircraft is going to be like. But it does feel as though, it'd be a big miss in terms of that image and that experience of being a traveller. When I think about what you mentioned, Restream and Day One, I'm making a link here. I'm joining the dots for you, because when we go back to the earlier comment I made about being a pixel being and making things film-like, and you've got your right to craft perform, and ultimately, when I think about the habits and behavior of filmmakers, they're always coming in with ideas that they jot down on the pad or with pen and paper or with their kind of touch screen and finger. And I think there's a link between Day One and Restream, as I make it in my head, which is ultimately the barriers to entries are being removed time and time again. I think you're right. Listening to what you said about Restream, goodness, I mean, you literally now, between one or two of you, can really produce something quite exciting that would have been beyond our reach from a budget point of view, but also from a skill and technology point of view. Now, with your laptop, what you can do. So the battleground really is about who's going to have the best idea, who's going to come up with the best format, the vision for their programming. As you know, when I do the webinars on content marketing, I do make analogies with radio programming, TV programming, and filmmaking, because I say, these are the individuals whose job it is to come up with an idea. It's like Steven Spielberg, who says, my job is to dream, then come up with ideas and so on. And Ridley Scott saying, my job is to create worlds. And I think with regard to the maturation process of content marketing and live streaming, it won't be whether or not you're good at the tech. I think that would be taken for for granted. It's whether or not you've engaged your brain sufficiently to create that virtual experience because your idea was better. That's going to be, I think, and that's not new. That's been the case, as I mentioned a moment ago, for radio, TV, and more. So using day one to be, where you put the ideas down, they let them mature, and then using Restream to execute. I love, by the way, the reminder feature of day one. I wish probably some of what I'm using would have that. I mean, do you still use sometimes pen and paper? I mean, I still have pads and not pads everywhere around the house.
Absolutely right. My problem is I tend to lose the pieces of paper afterwards. but there you go. But no, it's almost like an incubator. And as you say, if you can come up with better ideas and preferably different ideas, and then put them onto that platform, then you're really going to stand out. You're really going to stand out. Pascal, I think it's time, and there's probably a link here by talking about the 747, which was launched in 1969, I think it was originally flew. Let's head back in time and look at this week in history. So let's get into this week in history. In July 1960, and I really like this, I didn't know this, in France, a handheld toy with the name The Magic Screen goes on sale. It was a huge success, and years later, the device became known as the Etch-a-Sketch. I always used to love playing with the knobs and drawing something, and then all you had to do is shake it and the image would completely disappear.
I did not know that, Roger. That's a big surprise to me. Well, listen, can you believe that 50 years ago, the Apollo 11 mission blasted off? On board, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. To know what happened, you have to wait till next week.
Oof, I think we can all guess. Over 40 years ago, 11th of July 1979, the first pictures of the surface of Mars were sent by NASA's spacecraft Mariner 4.
Roger, you're going to love this one. On the 9th of July 1981, the world was introduced to two characters, Donkey Kong and Mario. Universal Studios sued Nintendo, stating that the game infringed their King Kong trademark, and they lost.
I didn't know that. They lost. Kong, you would have thought that they would have had a fighting chance of winning that one. In July 1982, the movie Tron is released in the USA by Walt Disney Productions. State-of-the-art computer animations and graphics were created for this film using a staggering 2 megabytes of memory.
30 years ago, Roger, again, Nintendo released the most successful role-playing game franchises of all times, Final Fantasy.
25 years ago, 6th of July 1995, IBM completes the takeover of Lotus Development, hoping to challenge the dominance of Microsoft Excel with the Lotus 123 product. Goodness gracious, I can remember using Lotus 123 when I first got an office job back in the late 80s.
Likewise, but then finally, Roger, 14 years ago, July 2006, a San Francisco-based podcasting company called Audio launches a small microblogging project, which later was known as Twitter.
Again, I'm learning new stuff every time we do this podcast, and these are historical events and historical facts, and I didn't know half of those.
Well, that's at the heart of this segment. You and I mentioned, in the launch episode that things move on so quickly that sometimes you forget, but also sometimes something happens and you want to know, well, what was the trigger event from 10, 20, 50 to 100 years ago that led to all this? But it's kind of fascinating what's happening there. There was a lot of space exploration going on here, a lot of kind of video games, audio. Did you ever play the Final Fantasy franchise?
I've played pretty much every game that there is. Final Fantasy, loved it. I like the role-playing games. I was brought up on things like Dungeons and Dragons, Traveller, RuneQuest, and Fighting Fantasy was almost like a synthesis of quite a lot of those genres, wasn't it?
And of course, role-playing games is having a major, major renaissance for the last 2-3 years now. So I wouldn't be surprised if all those games are being remastered for current consoles. Although it's hard to keep up because I've got the PS4, but I've heard that the PS5 is coming up, and I'm wondering what's going to happen to my library of games. So there we are. But yeah, the Apollo 11 Yes, July '69. They spent 8 days in space from memory. That
Yeah,
must have
yeah.
been, and the famous thing about the operating system in the shuttle is probably nowhere near what your mobile phone could do. Um, these were real. This was real exploration. This is like
Hmm.
people exploring the jungles of different continents, 2-3 centuries ago. I mean, if someone said to you, "Hey, Roger, would you like to go on, in space, or even, would you like to fly with an aircraft that has a computer system that is pretty much, um, uh, we, good enough to just run your watch?" That's just you wouldn't do it, would you?
You wouldn't. But I mean, you think about all the fail-safe mechanisms. I mean, we've mentioned Boeing 747s. Think of a more modern airliner like an A320. Think of all the fail-safes, triple fail-safes, quadruple fail-safes that they have built into their flight management computers compared to what was running the Apollo mission was something like 6K or something like that of memory. It's just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. I think it's time to move on to the next part of the show, which is our creator shout-outs. So creator shout-outs, this is where we shout out one or two of people from our community, our friends, and from across the world. We focus in on a piece of content that they've put together. So Pascal, who have you got in the firing line for us this week?
So this week I was inspired by format and doing things a bit differently. So to begin with, I've got Nicole Osborne and Tiana Wilson-Bai. So there was like two of them, kind of Q&A, took a duet. And they went ahead with an Instagram video called Sweet Tips for Increasing Your Focus and Productivity. So as you can expect, lots of good advice, a lot of practical advice, particularly in current climate. But what I liked about it was the format. They truly embrace the vertical screen. So what they had, if you can imagine, Nicole was the host and Tiana was the guest. And for memory, Nicole was at the bottom of the screen, so bottom half, and Tiana was the top half. And literally, you were watching the Q&A, which was about 10 minutes, using vertical screen. And I just liked the way they put the effort into embracing that format, and because you would imagine the editing and everything else that came with it would have been just a bit more tricky than our preferred format of landscape screens. So I just wanted to give them a quick shout out. The next one, which is again about format and also doing something a bit more daring, comes from Joe Cameron and Beverly Sherratt. They work for a company called Launchpad Associates, specialized in HR and people management and productivity. Now, Joe Cameron actually contracted the COVID-19 virus and was off work for a very long time. She's back at work and she's doing very well, we're all pleased to say. But actually she wrote a very personal blog post, where she explained what it has meant to her. And she's saying that there's a lesson in there, particularly for employers, which is that until such time you had the misfortune of contracting the virus and having to deal with the effects of the virus, you will not know. And therefore, two things. Of course, keep your employers and employees safe. But if they tell you that they are struggling, if they tell you that things or the return to work is a challenge, do pay attention and listen. And the article she wrote was, employers, don't let coronavirus become the new ME, which is something that we don't understand. It's still new to us. I mean, just recently, Roger, you'll know that there's now talk about side effects. So you can recover from the virus, but there's still things that stay with you that affects your concentration, your kind of where you can function and so on. And it was two things. It was just the fact that it was a very sincere blog post, but actually reminded me that's how blogging began and was all about, Roger, which is for someone to give a sincere account of an event and see how others can learn from it, as opposed to how it's been hijacked sometime by content marketing. So there you have it. There was a Instagram video using a vertical screen to its full, and one that took blogging back to its source.
That's interesting what you said about don't let coronavirus become the new ME. You know about my past association with the financial services industry in the United Kingdom. ME for a long time was something that life insurance companies wouldn't recognize as a legitimate condition.
Right.
They just wouldn't recognize it. They just said people who have it they're just swinging the lead. They're just lazy. And of course, we know that's absolutely not the case. And it's actually a genuine chronic illness that you can have for a very long time. Now, obviously, COVID's got a much higher profile because of the crisis, but, we should never forget that those people who are taking a long time to recover from this could be experiencing very similar long-term symptoms, and I think it's really well worth highlighting that. So should I tell you about my creator shout-outs? Okay, first one is Vicky Taylor. Now, I've known Vicky from social media, particularly Facebook and Instagram, for quite a few years now, and often have chats via video. She is a marketer, but she focuses mainly on the hospitality industry, so especially hotels and resorts. And she's just put together this really interesting paper, which is available via her email list, and it's got the intriguing title of Theme Park Thinking. Now, as you know, I grew up in Blackpool, and Blackpool has one of the best theme parks in the entire world, Blackpool Pleasure Beach. It's almost like a living museum of fairground and theme park rides, roller coasters and ghost trains and that sort of thing. And I've been following Blackpool Pleasure Beach's experience with dealing with the COVID. Everything comes back to COVID at the moment, doesn't it? But how they've had to deal with social distancing in that environment, with people on roller coasters. And Vicky's theme park thinking is an incredibly interesting and inspirational look at the lessons that we can learn from what theme parks are having to think about to respond to opening up again after COVID. So well worth checking that out. If you've ever been to a theme park, Blackpool Pleasure Beach, Alton Towers, Thorpe Park, Flamingo Land, whatever it might be, and you'll be interested in this, just have a look at Vicky's paper. It's great. Second one, and this is coming back to something we said earlier on about the pronunciation of Huawei. Lady that I met at a conference in Montenegro, she's called Elise Cuvado. She lives in the UK, but she's originally from Spain, and she is actually one of the brand ambassadors for Huawei, and she's been doing a series of vlog interviews with their chief digital transformation officer. Now, I know there's a lot of difficulty with this brand at the moment. The UK government on the one hand back in January saying it will allow them to participate in 5G. Now it's saying that they're going to have to be stripped out of 5G by the year 2027, and there's a lot of people who think that there's implications on China spying on us and using our data for immoral purposes. But if you can strip all of that back, if you can avoid looking at the political stuff and the technological data stuff, and just listen to the pure conversations about customer focus and using data to give customers a great experience, then what Elise has been doing here with her vlog series is really well worth having a listen to.
Thanks for that. And I think you're right. As marketers and communicators, we can certainly be mightily aware of the political, economical, societal kind of challenges and dimensions to what we do. But to keep ourselves informed, to keep an open mind and so on is part of our trades. And yes, at this moment in time, China as a brand is having some real challenges and battles. Almost, I was saying to the niece this morning, my wife, it feels like, the new Cold War. It's not Russia this time, it's China, where there's always a reason to be concerned and complain. And by all means, we must go into this with our eyes open, which is that the majority of the claims are very, very valid. But Huawei in the UK, I didn't know that, Roger, but has been trading and has been in position for quite some years now. This is a name that we've heard of more recently as consumers, but in terms of their contribution to technology and so on, it's been around for a while, which is why, as you know, the operators have been told you've got the next 7 to 10 years to remove the presence went to the networks and more because of their presence. And I think if we can then go past that and just take on board the reflection and conclusions of practitioners, then I think that there's some value in that.
Absolutely right. Pascal, it's almost time for my second favourite part of the show, and I'm sure that this will alternate between my favourite and my second favourite. We're going to get into film marketing next. Well, Pascal, I've been looking forward so much to discussing this next film. In fact, we did mention it in passing in one of the earlier episodes of Two Geeks in a Marketing podcast, and it is Back to the Future, which was the highest grossing movie from 1985. Now, Back to the Future is probably one of my all-time favourite films. It's got good comedy, it's got good action, there's a bit of romance in it, there's science fiction, fantasy, and the time travel element. I love movies that have an element of time travel in them anyway, so things like Terminator, the Day of the Daleks episodes of Doctor Who all have those time paradoxes, but Back to the Future just brought it all together into one just superb, amazingly entertaining package. And I still can't believe that this film is 35 years old coming up, because if you watch it today, and I have to say we tend to watch it most Christmas mornings, it just feels like that sort of film to watch on Christmas morning. It's as fresh as it was when it was first made, Pascal.
Absolutely. Like you, we have a ritual. I would say it's once a year at no particular time of the year, but we watch the actual trilogy. I've got the DVD, now Blu-ray box set. I just buy it. For me, it's kind of proudly on the shelf alongside Star Wars and many others. And you're right. I think it was a surprise hit. It was almost approached like an indie movie. You had Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale wrote it. It was directed by Robert Zemeckis against the wishes of the studios at the time. But we need to be careful it doesn't turn into a film review, but actually this is about film marketing. So with that in mind, what I will say to you is my interest to discuss is how in 1985 you would have marketed a film without the internet. So we had the trailer, of course, you had the official Back to the Future tour where fans could meet and discuss. You had the press kind of coverage, but also, I would argue, early version of influencer marketing, because Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale cleverly asked Steven Spielberg to be the exec producer. Now, of course, he brought with him, his savvy in terms of filmmaking and so on, but I'm sure he had a big influence in the way in which he was made and marketed. I would also remind you, which is I think a lesson for all of us in this virtual settings of audio and video, that Universal Studios were the distributors, but it was made independently by a group of people, including Steven Spielberg. But the studios, when they actually got the movie finished print, they didn't know what it was. They said, well, what is it? Is it a sci-fi movie, but there's not enough violence and spaceships? Is it a comedy, but it's not really laugh-out-loud comedy? Is it risque? Because back then you had a big drive around things like Revenge of the Nerds and that type of movies of boys chasing girls and so on. The studios didn't know how to market it as well. So the best they could come up with was, the scene where, it's actually a big segment of the movie where Marty McFly's mother kind of falls for him, creating and a kind of secondary story about how he has to obviously make amends. So when it was first released, the strapline on the posters, because Universal Studios thought, well, this is a comedy, let's align it with the other comedies that we produced and launched. The strapline was, are you telling me my mother's got the hots for me? This was a strapline for Back to the Future. Needless to say, that was quickly put to one side and removed with what we know now. But what a success. I mean, look, you've got, the story, you've got the car, you've got the songs, you've got the musical score, you've got this kind of nostalgia of 1955 Americana, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to marketing, I was looking at an interview that Bob Gale gave for the 30th anniversary of Back to the Future when they did the box sets and so on. And he did say they were really nervous. It was released in just a small number of cinemas as they always do in July, kind of 1985. And by the second weekend, people were queuing up, very much like they did back in the days of Star Wars. And Bob Gale put it down to just word of mouth because they had nothing else. And it was until the movie became a success that the real marketing kind of machine kicked in.
And you know what, Pascal? I was at university in 1985, and I remember it was just everybody was talking about Back to the Future. Everybody wanted to go and see it. It had such a buzz about it, even though we didn't have digital, we didn't have the internet. Now, I was at university, as I said, and I remember there was posters up in the University Union saying, let's go to the cinema in groups to see this film. So they were. I suppose that was an early equivalent of a watch party, wasn't it? I always used to, very close to Leeds University, there was one of the early Forbidden Planet shops, and of course they had the posters up for weeks and weeks before. And I remember it being on in the comics that I was reading at the time, 2000 AD and stuff like that. So somehow, even in those days, they managed to create a massive amount of anticipation around this film so that you were absolutely desperate to go and see it. And as you say, when you actually did go to the cinema, they were queuing round the corner. So I think it was just a remarkable piece of marketing for the day.
It was. And if you think about it, it had its own artwork. The typography of Back to the Future is very, very unique, the photography and so on and so forth. But I think there were some iconic images that stay with you, the car, the everything else that kind of comes in, the way in which Marty McFly was dressed, Doc Brown, and the way he acted. I mean, I just love, his performance. Everything was just carefully crafted. And again, because of Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis coming from an independent kind of production, and they just knew how to pay attention to those the small details. And here we are 35 years later talking about it. And what is interesting about the Back to the Future kind of brand now, and what it signifies, is how now it's been taken over by, well, we know that there's a musical, a stage show, Back to the Future. They did have an attempt at a animated series in the early 90s with the actors, kind of doing the voiceover. But then countless reference in TVs and movies of today, where there's always a little nod to that movie. But what is fascinating, and again, it could be another lesson for all content creators out there, is that the script, which wasn't really changed, by the time they finished the film, the script was rejected 44 times, including Walt Disney Studios, who thought it was too risque, whereas Universal Studios thought it wasn't risque enough. And it was just that. And back to Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, they didn't change the script. They believed in the product and story so much that they continued, and I think perseverance is also part of what you need to think about as a content creator. But also, when something's a little different, you will get pushbacks because you don't fit in. Walt Disney, Universal could not make it fit like the other movies that they knew how to market.
Absolutely right. And do you know what? We were talking earlier on about marketing slogans and strap lines. So much of the dialogue in Back to the Future is quotable, and people remember, like, Great Scott, oh my God, Doc, this is heavy. 2.21 gigawatts, or is it 1.21
it is
gigawatts?
1.21,
I can't remember.
Yes.
The flux capacitor, all of these things, they're part of our everyday language. And another thing I love about Back to the Future is that over the years as well, stuff's trickled out. Like, they shot more or less the entire movie with a different actor, Eric Stoltz. And unfortunately, Eric is a phenomenally good character actor, but he didn't really have the comedic timing that they wanted for Back to the Future. So they reshot the whole thing with Michael J. Fox. Now, can you imagine doing that, effectively making the film twice? But that was the conviction that they had, that it had to have that certain combination of scripting and actors and all those memes that we've come to know. And the other thing, of course, now is that there's loads of outtakes that you can find on the internet, some of which they deliberately created. There's one I see where Marty is dressed up as a sort of drug dealing gangster, wandering round the school, peering through the doors. They actually orchestrated that, potentially with just knowing that one day they could let these things drizzle out into internet land and effectively keep the brand going.
If we think back about the creation of the film and how it links to marketing, which is take position, create a language, create a visual language, take some risk and believe in yourself. So, for example, rule number 1, if you remember, we can only watch it every Christmas, there is no opening credits.
Mm-hmm.
The movie starts pretty much inside Doc Brown's house, as we assume, with all the clocks and so on. Whereas normally you would have the music to kind of raise your emotions and get you excited. You would have the names and so on. So again, it's back to this idea of, yes, there is a way and a format that is accepted right now out there. But if you come up with an idea, it doesn't have to be better, but if it's an idea that you feel like you want to explore fully, take that risk. Many have taken risks before you, and it's really paid off. And I do think that that's one of the reasons why this film is successful is not because they listen to Universal, not because they listen to Walt Disney, but because the creators, the storytellers, just knew that they had something. And with patience, as well as good and kind of skill set, they got what they wanted.
Absolutely. And again, I don't know whether it was planned, but, when they made the second film, Back to the Future 2, and part of that was set in 2015. And of course, we've been and gone past 2015. And there was another marketing opportunity for the studio to effectively relaunch the Blu-ray and DVD, and obviously the amazing thing to compare the predictions that they made for things like hoverboards and self-closing jackets and self-closing training shoes. That was a great opportunity for people to compare what Back to the Future predicted with the reality that it turned out to be. And I think that quite a lot of the things that they predicted did come to pass, apart from the hoverboards, unfortunately.
That was the biggest disappointment, but you're right.
Yeah.
In 21st of October 2015, I don't know of anyone that didn't actually jump on the Back to the Future day, from big brands to vloggers and bloggers and fans of the film. I even have someone that I know in Durham who was dressed as Marty McFly and was doing kind of selfies and kind of walking around Durham and so on. For us, one of the reasons we wanted to mention Back to the Future as part of this podcast is back to film marketing. What are the lessons that we can learn? But also, more importantly, what are the lessons we can learn from films before the internet? Because I think there's a convenience factor with the internet where people can quickly come up with, well, this is the plan because that's what we're going to do online. When you release a film in 1985 and you're not sure it's going to work, what else is available to you? And it begins, I think, with a strong product. So the crafting of Back to the Future, from the way it looks and sounded, and I'll take you back to a comment I made earlier about the calligraphy of the title, and the photography style, and the language that you pointed out, so that it was a unique film. Nobody else wrote the script the way it was written. Nobody said those words before and since, apart from, out of respect, in TV series like Big Bang Theory and the likes. You start with a strong product, start with a strong offer, and then once you surround yourself with the right people, I think that was also what was important to think about it. They tried the studios, didn't quite work. So I tell you what then, studios, you'll do your bit as a distributor. You'll just pass on. But we're going to surround ourselves with the right people. I think the key appointment on the board, so to speak, of the steering group was Steven Spielberg, who was doing rather well already then back in the mid-80s, but even himself was still at heart an indie filmmaker and producer.
This has been such a great conversation, Pascal, and I know that unless I put a stop to this, we could carry on talking about Back to the Future for the rest of the afternoon. So I think I'm going to have to quote Biff Tannen to bring this segment to a close. I think we need to make like a tree and get out of here. Or was it make like a tree and leave? I can never remember which. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Two Geeks in a Marketing Podcast. We'd be delighted if you'd subscribe to the show, leave comments or suggestions in all the places that you watch and listen to your podcasts. Until next time, go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Roger Edwards and he was Pascal Fintoni.